Hey everyone, welcome to another installment of Criticisms of Lutheranism. We're looking at baptism, and today we're looking at Colossians chapter 2. So I'm going to start at Colossians 2 verse 9, and I'm going to go down all the way to verse 12. For in Christ, all the fullness of the deity lives in bodily form, and in Christ you have been brought to fullness. He is the head over every power and authority. In him you were also circumcised with a circumcision not performed by human hands. Your whole self, ruled by the flesh, was put off when you were circumcised by Christ, having been buried with him in baptism, in which you were also raised with him through your faith in the working of God, who raised him from the dead. Okay, so this section starts out with Paul telling us the authority that Jesus has. First of all, the fullness of the deity. Everything that God is, Jesus is, right? He also is head over every power and authority, which is his authority over all things in the earth. That includes not just human rulers and authorities, but also the power of the demons. And then it says, in him you were circumcised with a circumcision not performed by human hands. So if you remember the Old Testament, the mark of the covenant for the Old Testament Christians was that all males were going to be circumcised on the 8th day. Now, circumcision was not something that you did to yourself, right? This was something that was done to you. Of course, when you're 8 days old, you can't do anything for yourself anyways. But Paul says that the circumcision that he's talking about is not that circumcision. It's a different type of circumcision. It's a different mark of the covenant. It's a different change in anatomy, right? And he says that your whole self was ruled by the flesh, and it was put off when you were circumcised by Christ. Well, Jesus didn't actually cut off the foreskin of any person. So what does he mean circumcised by Christ? There must be a different type of thing that he's talking about here. What is that different thing? Verse 12, having been buried with him in baptism, in which you were also raised with him through your faith in the working of God, who raised him from the dead. So the circumcision not done by human hands is baptism. Now, that does not mean that baptism and circumcision are one-to-one equivalents in the Old Testament and the New Testament, but what Paul is doing is he's borrowing from the Old Testament picture of circumcision and saying this mark, this thing that was done to little boys is similar to the way that you are passively brought into the family, being buried with Jesus through baptism, right? He says the connection is baptism to circumcision. Now, a couple things we can learn from this. Again, this is purely passive. In the same way that you are circumcised, you don't do your own circumcision. You are baptized. You do not do your own baptism. In other words, it's not your choice. It's something that God does to you. And that thing, that baptism, it buries you with Christ. It does something to you. It puts you in the ground. Sometimes you'll see this with baptisms that they'll be done with a full immersion, right? That a person is standing upright and then they'll be lowered down into the water and they'll be raised back up. Well, that's the picture of death to life, right? Buried with him through baptism and raised to new life. So what Paul wants you to understand here is that baptism is something that God does to you, and what it does to you is it buries you and gives you new life. It gives you the promise of resurrection in the same way that Jesus was resurrected. Hope that helps, and I hope you join us for our next video.